Arizona Territory, 1878. The merciless summer sun beat down on Catherine Hargrove's parched lips as she stumbled forward, one hand braced against her swollen belly, the other clutching an empty canteen. 3 days since the wagon train had abandoned her. 3 days of desperate wandering through an endless landscape of sand, rock, and skeletal vegetation. Her cotton dress, once sky blue and crisp, now hung in salt-stained tatters around her ankles, catching on every scrub brush and cactus spine. "Just a little farther," she whispered to the child within her, though she had no destination, no hope of rescue, only the stubborn instinct to keep moving, to survive one more hour, one more mile. "Your pa would want us to keep fighting." Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The wagon master's words still burned in her ears. Choleras. No respectful disease, Mrs. Hargrove, takes the strong and weak alike, but we can't risk the whole train for one widow, especially not in her condition. God will provide. God, it seemed, had other plans. Or perhaps he'd simply forgotten this corner of his creation, this brutal expanse where nothing thrived but thorns and vengeance. Catherine's legs buckled beneath her. The ground rose up to meet her cheek, oddly cool against her sunburned skin. Strange how the earth could burn like a griddle under the midday sun, yet retain a breath of coolness just beneath its surface. She pressed her face deeper into the dirt, seeking relief. Her thoughts drifted to Richmond, to the tidy boarding house. Room she'd shared with Thomas before the war's end brought opportunity westward. Thomas, with his easy smile and grand dreams of California orchards. Thomas, dead of cholera and buried in a shallow grave 3 days' journey back, his meager headstone nothing but a cairn of desert rocks. "I'm sorry," she murmured, unsure if she was addressing her husband or their unborn child. "I'm so very sorry." A shadow fell across her face, a trick of her dying mind, perhaps. Then came the unmistakable sound of leather creaking, the soft nickering of a horse. Catherine forced her swollen eyes open. A pair of moccasined feet stood before her, attached to legs wrapped in fringed buckskin. Her gaze traveled upward, squinting, against the sun's glare to find a face that seemed carved from the same weathered rock as the mountains, half in shadow, half in piercing light. The stranger knelt beside her. Catherine flinched, expecting violence, but his movements were careful, measured as he pressed a waterskin to her cracked lips. "Drink slow," he said, his voice a low rumble that seemed to emerge from the earth itself. "Too much will make you sick." She obeyed, though every instinct screamed for her to gulp the precious liquid. It tasted of leather and minerals and life itself. When he pulled the waterskin away, Catherine found her voice, though it emerged as little more than a rasp. "Are you real?" A flicker of something, amusement perhaps, crossed the man's face. His features were a curious blend, high cheekbones and copper skin, contrasting with eyes the color of a winter sky. Not fully Indian, but not white either. A man of two worlds, belonging completely to neither. "Real enough," he answered, assessing her condition with a clinical gaze. "Your baby," Catherine's hand moved protectively to her belly, "7 months along." He nodded once, decision made. "Can you ride?" "I don't know." The mere thought of mounting a horse seemed as impossible as flying to the moon. Without further discussion, the stranger gathered her into his arms. Catherine had never felt so small, so fragile, as he lifted her with surprising gentleness and placed her atop his paint horse. He swung up behind her, one arm securing her against his chest. "I'm taking you to Running Deer's camp," he said, urging the horse forward. 2 hours' ride. The women there will know what to do." Catherine wanted to ask who Running Deer was, where this camp might be, whether she could trust this taciturn rescuer. But exhaustion claimed her before she could form the words, her body going limp against the stranger's solid frame. Her last conscious thought was that death, when it came, had taken an unexpected form. Neither the white-robed angel of her childhood, teachings, nor the skeletal reaper of common law, but a half-Apache trader with eyes like winter sky. The sound of women's voices pulled Catherine back to consciousness. She lay on something soft, rabbit furs perhaps, in the relative coolness of a brush shelter. The scent of herbs and wood smoke filled her nostrils, so different from the parched emptiness of open desert. "She wakes!" someone said in accented English. An elderly woman's face appeared above Catherine, deeply lined and framed by silver-streaked black hair. She placed a cool cloth on Catherine's forehead and spoke again, this time in her native tongue. From beyond Catherine's field of vision came the now familiar rumble of her rescuer's voice, responding in the same language. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Catherine struggled to sit up, but firm hands pressed her shoulders back down. "Rest," commanded the old woman. "Bad for baby if mother fights." "Where am I?" Catherine asked, suddenly frightened by the unfamiliar surroundings. The strange faces peering at her from the shelter's entrance. "Apache camp," the woman answered simply. "I am Running Deer. You stay until strong enough to travel." She gestured toward the shelter opening, where Catherine's rescuer stood, silhouetted against the evening light. "My son brought you. Gideon." Gideon. The name seemed incongruous with his appearance, a white man's Bible name attached to a man who seemed more at home in this wilderness than any settler she'd ever met. As if sensing her thoughts, he turned to meet her gaze. "My father was a missionary," he explained, his tone making it clear the subject was closed. "My husband was a dreamer," Catherine found herself saying, though no one had asked. "He wanted to plant apple trees in California." Running Deer clicked, her tongue sympathetically. "Many dreams die in this land, but new ones grow." She placed a weathered hand on Catherine's belly. "This one is strong, a fighter like mother." Catherine nearly laughed at that. She'd never considered herself strong. Certainly Thomas hadn't. "Delicate as morning dew," he used to say, as if her fragility were her most precious quality. Yet here she was, having survived 3 days alone in terrain that had killed stronger travelers. Perhaps there was something to the old woman's assessment after all. "The wagon train," Catherine said, suddenly remembering. "They left me, said I had cholera, like Thomas." Running Deer's eyes narrowed. "You have no sickness, only sun and thirst." She exchanged glances with her son. "White people fear what they do not understand." "They were afraid," Catherine said, feeling a strange need to defend people who had effectively sentenced her to death. "The cholera had already taken 12, including my husband." "And your belongings?" Gideon asked, stepping fully into the shelter. "Did they fear those as well?" The question struck Catherine like a physical blow. In her struggle to survive, she hadn't fully processed what the wagon master's decree had meant. They had left her with nothing but her dress, wedding ring, and a single canteen of water. Her trunk, containing Thomas's letters, her mother's silver hairbrush, her father's pocket watch, and all her worldly possessions, had continued westward without her. "They took everything," she whispered, the full weight of her abandonment finally settling on her shoulders. Running Deer muttered something that sounded like a curse. Gideon's expression hardened, but he said nothing, merely nodded, as if Catherine had confirmed a long-held suspicion. "Rest now," Running Deer instructed, pressing a clay cup of bitter-smelling liquid into Catherine's hands. "Drink, for the baby." Catherine hesitated only briefly before drinking the herbal concoction. Trust, like hope, was a luxury she could scarcely afford. Yet what choice did she have? These strangers, this strange woman and her half-Apache son, had saved her life when her own kind had condemned her. As the medicine's drowsiness overtook her, Catherine's last sight was of Gideon standing watch at the shelter's entrance, his profile sharp against the dying light. Not an angel, certainly. Perhaps not even a friend, but for now, he was all that stood between her child and the unforgiving desert that had already claimed her husband. Tomorrow would bring decisions, explanations, perhaps even plans. But tonight, beneath a canopy of stars brighter than any Virginia sky she'd known, Catherine Hargrove slept the dreamless sleep of the rescued. She did not yet know that her ordeal was just beginning, that the wagon train's abandonment was no accident of fear, but the first move in a game with stakes higher than mere survival. Nor could she guess that the Half-Apache trader would soon face a choice between the two worlds he straddled, with her fate hanging in the balance. For now, she slept, one hand curled protectively around her swollen belly, the other clutching Thomas's wedding ring on the chain around her neck, the ring that, unbeknownst to her, contained a secret worth killing for. Dawn broke over the Apache camp in a flood of amber light. Catherine woke to the unfamiliar sounds of women grinding corn, children's laughter, and horses nickering in the distance. For one disorienting moment, she thought herself back in Virginia. Before the war had swept away her childhood home and everything familiar, reality returned as her child shifted within her womb. She placed a protective hand over the movement, marveling that after everything, Thomas's death, the wagon train's betrayal, 3 days alone in the desert, this small life persisted. "You are awake. Good." Running Deer entered the brush shelter, carrying a clay bowl of steaming liquid and a bundle of cloth. "These for you." She set down the bowl and unfolded the bundle to reveal a simple doe-skin dress, softened by years of wear. "Your clothes not good for dessert. Too many." She gestured at Catherine's tattered cotton dress with its impractical buttons and layers. Catherine fingered the offered garment hesitantly. Accepting Indian clothing seemed a step beyond mere survival, a crossing of boundaries she hadn't anticipated. Running Deer noted her hesitation with shrewd eyes. "You prefer to die properly dressed as white woman?" The blunt question startled a hoarse laugh from Catherine. "When you put it that way." She took the dress. "Thank you." The older woman nodded, satisfied. "Drink first. Helps baby." Catherine sipped the bitter tea while Running Deer busied herself around the shelter, hanging bundles of drying herbs from the low ceiling. The domesticity of the scene struck Catherine as surreal, a quiet morning ritual conducted as if she belonged here, as if her world hadn't collapsed just days ago. "Your son," Catherine ventured. "Gideon. Is he—" She trailed off, unsure how to frame her question without causing offense. "Half white," Running Deer supplied, seeming untroubled. "Yes. His father was God-talker who came to save Apache souls." Her tone held neither bitterness nor fondness, merely stating fact. "He died. When soldiers came, Gideon was 7 summers. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you." "I'm sorry," Catherine said automatically, though she sensed Running Deer had little use for white condolences. "Life continues," the older woman replied with a shrug. "Gideon walks 2 paths, not easy, but makes him see things others cannot." She paused, studying Catherine. "Like white woman left to die by her own people." "They thought I had cholera," Catherine repeated, the explanation sounding hollow even to her own ears. Running Deer made a dismissive sound. "Cholera brings great sickness, vomiting, watery bowels. You had none of these when my son found you." The observation lodged in Catherine's mind like a splinter. If not cholera, then why had Wagon Master Collins been so insistent she leave immediately? The memory surfaced with uncomfortable clarity. Collins arguing with the other men, his gaze repeatedly falling to Thomas's meager possessions that Catherine had packed away after the burial. I don't understand, she murmured, more to herself than to Running Deer. Understanding comes with time, the older woman said cryptically. Now eat, then we talk more. After a simple breakfast of corn cakes and dried berries, Catherine changed into the doe-skin dress behind a privacy screen of woven reeds. The soft garment settled over her swollen belly with none of the constraints of her proper attire, and she experienced a shameful moment of pleasure at the comfort before guilt reasserted itself. Thomas would be scandalized to see his wife dressed like a savage. Thomas is dead, a practical voice in her head reminded her. And you nearly joined him because of proper white ways. When she emerged, Running Deer nodded approval. Better. Now you can move. Move where? Catherine asked, sudden, anxiety gripping her. I can't stay here, but I have nowhere to go. That decision not for me to make, Running Deer said, gesturing toward the shelter entrance where Gideon now stood, his tall frame blocking most of the morning light. Catherine straightened instinctively, under his assessing gaze, aware of how she must appear in borrowed Apache clothing, her blonde hair falling loose around her shoulders. You look stronger today, he observed, his deep voice betraying no particular emotion. Thanks to your mother's care, Catherine acknowledged, and to you for finding me. I would have died out there. Gideon entered the shelter, moving with the same economical grace she'd noted yesterday. Up close, the duality of his heritage was even more apparent, his father's height and aquiline nose set against his mother's copper complexion and high cheekbones. Why were you traveling alone? He asked without preamble. Catherine blinked at the directness. I wasn't. Not initially. We left Independence in April with the Colson wagon train. 42 people heading for California. She swallowed hard. Then the cholera came. And your husband? Thomas died 5 days ago. We buried him beside the trail. Catherine's fingers found his ring on its chain beneath the doe-skin dress. He was the 12th to die. After that, Wagon Master Collins said I showed symptoms and had to leave to protect the others. What symptoms? Gideon's blue eyes narrowed. Catherine hesitated. I was feverish, but it was just the heat, I think. And I was grieving. Grieving is not cholera, Gideon said flatly. What did your husband carry that they wanted? The question hit with such precision that Catherine took an involuntary step backward. I don't understand. I think you do. His gaze was relentless. Men like Collins don't abandon pregnant women out of fear alone. They do it for profit. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Catherine's mind raced. Thomas had been secretive about certain aspects of their journey, particularly the small oilskin packet he kept inside his shirt. After his death, she'd found it among his effects, a folded document with strange markings that meant nothing to her. She'd tucked it into her own bodice, intending to decipher it later. There might have been, she began hesitantly, some papers. Thomas never explained their importance. Something flickered in Gideon's expression, confirmation, perhaps, of a suspicion already held. Where are these papers now? Hidden, Catherine said, a surge of protective instinct making her cautious despite her debt to this man. It's all I have left of him. Gideon studied her for a long moment, then gave a slight nod, as if respecting her reticence. The wagon train continues to Tucson, following the San Pedro River. From there, they'll take the southern route to California. The precision of his knowledge surprised her. How do you know their route? I know everything that moves through this territory, he said simply. Apaches, Mexicans, white settlers, where they go, what they carry. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. Even what they hope to hide. Catherine felt a chill despite the warming day. This man was far more dangerous and knowledgeable than she'd first assumed. "What happens to me now?" she asked, voice steadier than she felt. "That depends on your courage," Gideon replied, "and how badly you want justice for your husband." Justice? The word seemed to echo in the small shelter. "You think Thomas's death wasn't from cholera?" Running Deer, who had remained silent during their exchange, spoke up. 12 people die, then suddenly sickness stops when they leave you behind? Convenient timing. The implications staggered Catherine. Could Thomas have been deliberately poisoned, the others as well? It seemed impossible, yet the wagon master's strange behavior, his insistence on searching Thomas's belongings after his death. "Fort Bowie is 3 days' ride," Gideon continued. "Army post with a telegraph office. From there you could contact family in the east, arrange passage home." "I have no family left," Catherine admitted. "The war took my father and brother. My mother died 2 winters ago. Then California," Gideon suggested. "Many widows find new starts there." Catherine's hand moved to her belly. "And how would I get to either place? I have no money, no possessions." "I'm a trader," Gideon said. "I travel between the Apache camps, the Mexican villages, and the white settlements. I can take you to Fort Bowie when you're strong enough to travel." The offer seemed straightforward, yet Catherine sensed underlying currents, motivations left unstated. "Why would you help me further? You've already saved my life." "Perhaps I'm curious about those papers," he acknowledged with unexpected candor. "Or perhaps I've seen too many innocents die in this territory." Running Deer made a soft sound, almost like a snort. "My son collects strays like others collect trinkets. Wounded coyote pup, bird with broken wing, now pregnant white woman." Despite everything, Catherine felt the corners of her mouth twitch upward. "Not the company I expected to keep." "Life seldom matches our expectations," Gideon observed. "You have 2 days to rest. Then we ride for the fort." With that, he ducked out of the shelter, leaving Catherine with more questions than answers. She turned to Running Deer, who was gathering her herbs with practiced movements. "Is he always so—" Catherine searched for the right word. "Direct?" Running Deer supplied. "Yes. Gideon has no patience for the white man's dance of words. He speaks truth as he sees it." She tied her herb bundle with a leather strip. "A dangerous habit in both worlds." "Both worlds," Catherine repeated thoughtfully. "It can't be easy, belonging to neither fully." Running Deer's sharp gaze assessed her with new interest. "Perhaps you understand more than I thought, Catherine." "Hargrove, I understand being caught between worlds," Catherine said softly. "I'm neither wife nor widow, not truly. The life I planned died with Thomas, but this new life," she touched her belly, "it demands I become someone I never prepared to be." "Good," Running Deer said with surprising vehemence. "Old Catherine would have died in desert. New Catherine might survive what comes next." The cryptic warning lingered in the air between them as Running Deer left the shelter. Catherine sank back onto her bedding of rabbit furs, suddenly exhausted, despite having just woken. What did come next? Justice for Thomas seemed a remote, abstract concept compared to the immediate challenge of keeping herself and her unborn child alive, yet the possibility that his death was no accident burned in her mind, kindling a spark of anger she'd never allowed herself to feel. Outside, she could hear Gideon speaking with other men in the Apache tongue. Occasionally his voice would switch to Spanish, then back again. A man of multiple languages, multiple worlds. Perhaps exactly the guide she needed in this unfamiliar territory where nothing was as it seemed. Catherine's fingers found Thomas's ring again, tracing its smooth contours through the doe-skin dress. Her husband had been a gentle dreamer, ill-suited to the harsh realities of frontier life, but he'd been hers, and if someone had taken him from her deliberately, the spark of anger flared brighter. New Catherine, Running Deer had called her. Perhaps this new Catherine had more steel in her spine than anyone, including herself, had ever suspected. The Apache camp awakened something in Catherine that Virginia finishing school and Richmond society had long suppressed, a practical resilience she hadn't known she possessed. Over the next 2 days, she found herself drawn into the rhythm of camp life, observing the women as they worked hides, prepared food, and tended to children. Running Deer proved to be a patient teacher, showing Catherine how to grind mesquite beans into flour, explaining which desert plants held precious water, which offered medicine, which promised death if mishandled. "Knowledge keeps you alive," the older woman said simply when Catherine thanked her. "Desert gives freely to those who understand its ways." By the evening of the second day, Catherine could identify 5 edible plants, start a fire with flint and steel, and carry water in a tightly woven basket, skills that would have seemed ludicrously primitive in her former life, yet now represented the difference between survival and death. Her body, too, was recovering. The sunburn had faded to a tender pink, her cracked lips were healing, and the persistent dizziness had subsided. Only her swollen ankles and the occasional sharp pain in her lower back reminded her of her precarious condition. "Your time is still distant," Running Deer assured her after examining her belly with knowing hands. "First babies often wait until moon is full and round, like mother." The casual reference to motherhood sent a flutter of panic through Catherine. How would she manage childbirth alone? Where would she even be when the time came? As if sensing her thoughts, Running Deer added, "I have delivered many children. If you are still here, I will help bring yours into the world." The simple offer of assistance brought unexpected tears to Catherine's eyes. "I don't know how to thank you." "Live," Running Deer said matter-of-factly. "That is thanks enough." That evening, as Catherine sat outside the shelter watching the sunset paint the desert in impossible shades of gold and crimson, Gideon approached and lowered himself beside her. For several minutes, they shared a companionable silence. "We leave. At first light," he finally said, his deep voice pitched low enough that only she could hear. "Pack what you need, but travel light. The journey to Fort Bowie will not be easy." Catherine nodded, hands folded protectively over her belly. "Will we travel alone?" "2 Apache scouts will accompany us part of the way," he replied. "Men I trust. Beyond Apache Pass, we continue alone." "Is that safe?" she asked, thinking not of her own welfare, but of the child within her. Gideon's expression remained impassive. "Safer than staying. Word has reached me that men from your wagon train have been asking questions in the Mexican villages, describing a blonde woman with child." The implication sent a chill through her. "They're looking for me? Why?" "I suspect it has something to do with those papers you're carrying." Gideon's gaze moved deliberately to her chest, where Thomas's documents lay hidden beneath layers of clothing. Catherine's hand instinctively moved to the spot, confirming his suspicion. "How did you touch that place when you speak of your husband," he explained, "and when you're afraid." She hadn't realized her unconscious tell was so obvious. "The papers are meaningless to me. Just markings and numbers. Yet men are willing to kill for them," Gideon observed quietly. "First your husband, then abandoning you to certain death. Now searching villages with increasing desperation." The brutal assessment hit Catherine like a physical blow. She'd been holding on to hope that Running Deer's suspicions about deliberate poisoning were merely the natural distrust of whites by an Apache woman. Hearing Gideon confirm it with such certainty forced her to confront an uglier truth. "If what you say is true," she said carefully, "then I've been naive beyond imagining. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you." "Not naive," Gideon countered, "simply sheltered from certain realities." The frontier attracts men of particular ambition, men who see opportunity in others' vulnerabilities. Like Collins, Catherine murmured, the wagon master's furtive behavior now cast in sinister light. Like Collins, Gideon agreed, though I doubt he acts alone. Catherine stared into the darkening desert, processing this new understanding of her situation. She was not merely a widow in unfortunate circumstances, but a target, hunted for something her husband had possessed, something she now carried unwittingly. "Will you show me the papers?" Gideon asked after a moment. "I may be able to decipher their meaning." Catherine hesitated. Trust came at a premium in this harsh land, and this man, for all his assistance, remained largely a mystery to her. "How do I know I can trust you?" she asked directly, adopting his own straightforward manner. A hint of approval flickered in his eyes. "You don't. But consider our positions. I could have taken the papers while you slept these past days, yet I didn't. I could leave you here and avoid whatever trouble follows you, yet I'm offering safe passage." His logic was irrefutable. With deliberate movements, Catherine reached beneath the collar of her doeskin dress and withdrew a small oilskin packet secured with Thomas's bootlace. She handed it to Gideon, who opened it carefully. Inside lay a folded document covered with drawings that resembled a map, notations in what appeared to be Spanish, and a series of numbers. Gideon studied it in the fading light, his expression gradually shifting from curiosity to something more intense. "Do you know what this is?" Catherine asked, watching him closely. "I have suspicions," he replied, refolding the document with precise movements. "This appears to be part of an old Spanish land grant. See these markings? They indicate boundaries, water sources." He pointed to specific symbols. "And these numbers may be coordinates." "A land grant," Catherine repeated, confused. "Thomas never mentioned anything about land claims. We were going to California to start an orchard." "Perhaps that was his intention," Gideon said carefully. "But this document suggests otherwise. Spanish land grants in this territory are complicated matters, some dating back generations, many with disputed ownership after the Gadsden Purchase transferred these lands from Mexico to the United States." Catherine tried to reconcile this information with what she knew of her husband. Thomas had always been somewhat secretive about their finances, handling all such matters as befitted a proper husband. But land claims, hidden documents, it painted him in a light she scarcely recognized. "If this is valuable," she said slowly, "why didn't Thomas sell it? We struggled for money after the war." Gideon's eyes met hers, penetrating in their directness. Perhaps he didn't know what he had. Or perhaps he knew exactly and was waiting to claim it himself once you reached the territory. The implication that Thomas might have had ulterior motives for their westward journey disturbed Catherine deeply. She'd believed they were seeking a fresh start, a place to raise their child away from the bitter memories of Richmond after the Confederate defeat. Had he been using her all along to further some land scheme? "I need to think," she said, reaching for the document. Gideon returned it without hesitation. "Keep it hidden, but somewhere new. Your current hiding place is too obvious." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time. So if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Catherine nodded, tucking the packet into a small leather pouch Running Deer had given her, which she tied securely around her waist beneath the dress. The weight of it felt heavier now, laden with unanswered questions and implications she couldn't yet fully grasp. "Get some rest," Gideon advised, rising to his feet in one fluid motion. "Tomorrow we'll test your strength." After he left, Catherine remained outside, watching as stars appeared in the vast Arizona sky, more stars than she'd ever seen in Virginia, their brilliance undimmed by city lights or coal smoke. The immensity of the heavens made her feel simultaneously insignificant and connected to something greater than herself. What would Thomas think of her now, dressed in Apache clothing, learning survival skills from people he would have considered savages, preparing to travel with a half-breed trader? To an army fort? The proper Virginia gentleman would be scandalized, yet Thomas wasn't here. He'd left her, whether by cruel fate or someone's deliberate action, to navigate this dangerous world alone. No, not alone. With their child, a reminder that whatever else might have motivated him, their love had been real enough to create new life. Catherine placed both hands on her swollen belly, feeling the baby shift beneath her touch. "We'll survive this," she promised softly, "and we'll discover the truth about your father's death, whatever it costs." Dawn arrived with the scent of sage and wood smoke. Catherine had slept fitfully, her dreams troubled by images of Thomas standing at a property line, pointing to land that shifted like water beneath his feet. She woke feeling unrested but resolute. Running Deer helped her prepare for the journey, providing a small bundle of dried meat, corn cakes, and medicinal herbs. "For nausea," she explained, pointing to one particular packet. "Journey may unsettle the baby. Will you be here if we return?" Catherine asked, suddenly reluctant to leave this woman who had shown her such practical kindness. "Apaches move with the seasons," Running Deer replied, "but I will find you when your time comes, if that is your wish." "It is," Catherine said, firmly, surprising herself with the certainty of her response. Running Deer nodded, then pressed something into Catherine's palm. A small stone amulet on a leather cord, etched with symbols Catherine didn't recognize. "Protection for mother and child, wear it." Catherine slipped it over her head without hesitation, tucking it beneath her dress alongside Thomas's ring. The weight of both against her skin felt right, a blending of past and present, a recognition of her changing identity. Outside, Gideon waited with 3 horses, his own paint stallion, a sturdy buckskin mare obviously intended for Catherine, and a pack horse loaded with supplies. 2 Apache men on horseback flanked him, their expressions inscrutable as they regarded the white woman in their midst. "This is Tall Pine and Swift Fox," Gideon introduced them. "They will ride with us through Apache Pass." Catherine inclined, her head respectfully. "Thank you for your protection." The men acknowledged her words with slight nods, their gazes curious but not hostile. She wondered briefly how many white women they had encountered who weren't either missionaries' wives or army officers' daughters, both categories that would have viewed them with fear or disdain. Gideon approached, hands cupped to give her a boost onto the buckskin mare. Catherine placed her boot in his interlaced fingers, grateful for the assistance, as her pregnancy made mounting unassisted impossible. Once seated, she arranged her dress for maximum comfort, acutely aware of the 3-day journey ahead. "The mare is gentle," Gideon assured her, adjusting the stirrups to her shorter legs. "But she responds best to a firm hand. Let her know you're in command." Catherine gathered the reins with more confidence than she felt. Her riding experience was limited to gentle canters around Richmond Parks on placid, well-trained mounts. This wild territory demanded a different kind of horsemanship. As the small party prepared to depart, Running Deer approached Catherine's horse. Without ceremony, she pressed a small knife into Catherine's hand, a blade perhaps 5 inches long with a bone handle secured in a rawhide sheath. "A woman should carry protection," the older woman said simply, "especially one who carries new life." Catherine tucked the knife into her belt, touched by the practical gift. "Thank you for everything." Running Deer stepped back, raising her hand in farewell. "Remember what I told you, Catherine Hargrove. Old Catherine died in the desert. New Catherine must be stronger than steel." With those words echoing in her mind, Catherine urged her mare forward, following Gideon into the vast expanse of territory that had nearly claimed her life days earlier. This time, however, she rode with purpose rather than desperation, her eyes alert to the landscape's details, her mind focused on the mysteries that lay ahead. Behind her, the Apache camp grew smaller, then disappeared entirely as they crested a rocky ridge. Before them stretched miles of desert, mountains rising blue and distant on the horizon. Fort Bowie lay somewhere beyond those peaks, and with it perhaps answers about Thomas's death and the document that had made her a target. Catherine straightened. In the saddle, one hand briefly touching her belly, the other resting near the knife at her waist. Running Deer was right. Old Catherine, the proper Virginia lady who deferred to men's judgment and fainted at the sight of blood, had no place in this world. New Catherine would need to be something altogether different if she and her child were to survive. As if sensing her resolve, the baby kicked sharply beneath her ribs. Catherine smiled grimly, interpreting it as agreement. After all, this child was half Hargrove, and if Thomas's hidden ambitions were any indication, perhaps the Hargroves had more steel in their spines than proper Richmond society had ever suspected. By midday, the sun had transformed from ally to enemy. Catherine felt its relentless heat pressing down on her shoulders, seeping through the doe-skin dress despite its superior protection compared to her cotton garments. Sweat trickled between her breasts and down her back, and the child within her seemed to absorb the warmth, growing heavier with each passing hour. She watched Gideon riding ahead, his straight back revealing no sign of discomfort, despite the punishing conditions. The two Apache scouts flanked their small party, sometimes disappearing for stretches, before materializing again on a ridge or behind a stand of mesquite, their movements as natural as the desert wind. They stopped in the shadow of a sandstone, outcropping, the meager shade offering precious relief. Catherine slid from her mare with Gideon's assistance, her legs trembling from the unaccustomed exertion. "We rest until the worst heat passes," Gideon announced, helping her settle against the cool stone. 2 hours, no more. Catherine accepted the waterskin he offered, drinking sparingly as she'd been taught. The liquid was warm and tasted of leather, but her parched throat received it gratefully. Tall Pine and Swift Fox conferred quietly with Gideon in Apache, their gestures indicating the terrain ahead. "Is something wrong?" Catherine asked when Gideon returned to check on her. "Not wrong," he replied, squatting beside her, "but we must alter our course. There are dust trails to the southeast, riders moving fast along the wagon road. The men looking for me?" The possibility sent a flutter of fear through her belly. Gideon nodded. "Likely. We'll take the northern route through the mountains. Longer but safer." "Is it passable in my condition?" Catherine hated acknowledging her limitations, but the baby's welfare had to come first. Something like respect flickered in Gideon's eyes at her practical question. "It's rougher terrain, but not beyond your capabilities. The mare is sure-footed, and we'll set a careful pace." He hesitated, then added, "Your body is stronger than you've been led to believe, Catherine Hargrove. Women have given birth on horseback when necessity demanded it." The frank assessment should have shocked her Virginia sensibilities. Instead, Catherine found it oddly reassuring. This man would not coddle her with false assurances nor drive her beyond true endurance. "Tell me about Thomas's papers," she said, changing the subject. "You recognized their significance immediately." "How?" Gideon settled more comfortably against the rock, accepting her redirection. "I've seen similar documents in land disputes throughout the territory. After the Gadsden Purchase of 1853, many Mexican land grants fell into legal limbo, technically valid under American law, but difficult to enforce." "And valuable?" Catherine pressed. "Potentially worth fortunes," he confirmed. "Especially if they contain what I suspect yours might, which is mining rights." The words hung in the heat-shimmered air between them. "Those coordinates mark an area in the Patagonia Mountains rumored to contain silver deposits, rich ones. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Catherine stared at him, memories suddenly realigning like puzzle pieces finding their proper places. Thomas's inexplicable interest in mining periodicals, his lengthy correspondence with a man named Ortega in Santa Fe, his insistence that they travel west despite her pregnancy. He never told me, she whispered, an unexpected hurt blooming beneath her breastbone. All his talk of orchards and fresh starts. Men often shield their wives from business matters, Gideon observed, though his tone suggested he found the practice foolish, even when those matters might get them killed. Catherine's voice sharpened with nascent anger, especially then. Gideon's blue eyes held hers steadily. Your husband likely thought he was protecting you. Fat lot of good it did either of us, Catherine muttered, the coarse language slipping out before she could catch herself. Surprisingly, Gideon laughed, a short, genuine sound that transformed his severe features. You're changing, Catherine. Hargrove, the desert burns away pretense. Catherine felt heat rise in her cheeks that had nothing to do with the Arizona sun. He was right, of course. The proper Richmond widow was disappearing hour by hour, replaced by someone rawer, more direct, someone who might actually survive this ordeal. Swift Fox approached, speaking rapidly to Gideon in Apache. Gideon's expression darkened as he replied, his hand moving instinctively to the rifle strapped to his saddle. What is it? Catherine asked, tension coiling in her belly. Riders coming from the west, Gideon answered tersely. 6, maybe 7, moving with purpose. Collins. Fear dried her mouth despite the water she'd just drunk. Can't be sure, but we're not waiting to find out. Gideon helped her to her feet. We ride now. Stay close and keep quiet. Within minutes their small party was moving again, this time at a faster pace toward a narrow canyon that cut between 2 rocky ridges. Catherine clung to her mare's mane, focusing on maintaining her balance as they navigated increasingly difficult terrain. The baby protested the jostling with sharp kicks against her ribs. Easy, she murmured, as much to herself as to the child. We'll rest soon enough. The canyon walls rose on either side, offering blessed shade but also hemming them in with fewer escape routes. Tall Pine took the lead, his rifle now across his lap as he scanned the ridge tops continuously. Swift Fox brought up the rear, occasionally turning in his saddle to check their back trail. Catherine felt exposed despite their precautions, hyper-aware of how her blonde hair would stand out against the russet landscape if spotted from above. She pulled up the hood of the traveling cloak Running Deer had provided, shrouding her face as best she could. Gideon rode beside her now, close enough that his knee occasionally brushed hers. There's a cave system ahead, he said quietly. If necessary, we can take shelter there until nightfall. The thought of dark, enclosed spaces sent a shiver of claustrophobia through Catherine, but she nodded grimly. Better temporarily uncomfortable than permanently dead. They had nearly reached the canyon's midpoint when the first shot rang out, the sharp crack echoing off the stone walls like thunder. Catherine's mare reared in panic, and only her death. Grip on the saddle horn kept her from falling. "Ride!" Gideon commanded, spurring his horse forward while simultaneously reaching over to grab her mare's bridle, forcing both animals into a gallop. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. More shots followed, sending rock shards splintering from the canyon walls. Catherine caught glimpses of men on the ridgeline above, their figures silhouetted against the harsh blue sky. Tall Pine returned fire, the report of his rifle deafening in the enclosed space. There! Gideon pointed toward a dark fissure in the canyon wall ahead. "When I say now, slide from your horse, I'll cover you." Catherine nodded, too breathless with fear to speak. They thundered toward the cave entrance, dust billowing behind them. Swift Fox had disappeared, presumably to outflank their attackers, while Tall Pine continued providing covering fire from behind a boulder. "Now!" Gideon shouted as they neared the crevice. Catherine released her grip on the saddle and let herself slide from the mare's back, hitting the ground harder than intended. Pain shot through her ankle, but adrenaline kept her moving. She scrambled toward the dark opening, one hand protecting her belly, the other pulling herself along the rough stone. Behind her, Gideon dismounted in one fluid motion, slapping both horses on their rumps to send them running down the canyon as a diversion. He backed toward the cave, rifle raised, firing methodically at the ridgetop. Once inside the cave's mouth, Catherine pressed herself against the cool stone wall, heart hammering so violently she feared it might burst from her chest. Gideon joined. Seconds later, his breathing controlled, despite their desperate flight. "Are you hurt?" he demanded, eyes scanning her for injuries. "My ankle," she managed. "Twisted, not broken, I think." He nodded, then peered cautiously around the cave entrance. "They're coming down. 4 men, armed." Catherine's hand went instinctively to her waist, where Running Deer's knife rested in its sheath. A pitiful defense against guns, but better than nothing. "The cave system branches about 20 yards in," Gideon said, his voice low and urgent. "We need to reach the first junction before they spot us. Can you move?" Catherine tested her weight. On the injured ankle. Pain flared, but it held. "Yes. Stay behind me. If I fall, keep going deeper." The passages eventually connect to the other side of the ridge. The gravity of his instruction, the implicit acknowledgement that he might not survive their escape, struck Catherine with physical force. This man was risking his life for her, for reasons still not entirely clear to her. "Why are you doing this?" she whispered as they moved deeper into the cave's cool darkness. "Why endanger yourself for me?" Gideon paused briefly, his face half illuminated by the faint light filtering from the entrance. "Because 20 years ago, another pregnant woman was abandoned in this desert. My mother. Only difference was, no one came for her except my father." The revelation stole Catherine's breath more effectively than any fall. "Running Deer was abandoned by Mexican traders who feared the Apache," he confirmed grimly. "History repeats itself in this territory. I'm simply trying to change the ending this time." Before Catherine could respond, voices echoed from the cave entrance, harsh, angry shouts as their pursuers discovered the hiding place. "Move," Gideon urged, guiding her deeper into the darkness. They navigated by touch now, the light from the entrance fading behind them. The cave floor was surprisingly smooth, worn by centuries of seasonal flash floods. Catherine's injured ankle throbbed with each step, but fear provided effective distraction from the pain. The promised junction appeared as a slightly lighter patch of darkness ahead. Gideon pulled her to the left passage without hesitation, his hand warm and steady on her elbow. "This way curves back toward Apache land," he explained, voice barely above a whisper. "They'll be less likely to follow." "Why?" Catherine asked, matching his hushed tone. "White men fear Apache territory, with good reason." There was a grim satisfaction in his voice that reminded Catherine forcefully of his dual heritage and where his deeper loyalties might lie. They had progressed perhaps 50 yards down the new passage when gunshots echoed behind them unnaturally. Loud in the confined space, their pursuers had reached the junction. "Down!" Gideon ordered, pulling Catherine into a crouch behind a large stalagmite formation. "Don't move!" She obeyed instantly, curling her body protectively around her swollen belly. In the absolute darkness, her other senses heightened. The mineral smell of the cave, the distant drip of water, Gideon's controlled breathing beside her, and the baby's restless movements within her womb. Footsteps and voices approached, along, with the wavering light of a torch. Catherine held her breath, pressing harder against the cold stone as if she could melt into it. They came this way, a man's voice insisted. Fresh scuff marks on the floor. I ain't going deeper into Injun. In territory, Collins, another voice responded, fear evident in its higher pitch. Not for all the silver in Mexico. Collins. The name sent ice through Catherine's veins. The wagon master himself had pursued her. Any lingering doubt about Thomas's death being deliberate vanished like morning mist in desert sun. The woman has the map, Collins snarled. Without it, we've got nothing to show Barton but excuses. She's probably dead anyway, a third voice argued. No tenderfoot Eastern lady survives 3 days alone in the desert. Then where's the body? Collins demanded. And whose tracks did we follow to this god-forsaken hole? No, she's alive, and she's got help. The voices faded slightly as the men moved farther down the passage, still arguing. Catherine remained frozen, scarcely daring to breathe until Gideon's, and found her arm in the darkness. There's another way out, he whispered directly into her ear, his breath warm against her cheek. But we must move now while they're distracted. They crept backward, away from the direction Collins and his men had taken, until they reached the junction again. This time, Gideon led her down the right-hand passage, which descended at a steeper angle. Mind your footing, he warned. There's water ahead. Sure enough, Catherine soon heard the gurgle of an underground stream. The passage widened into what felt like a larger chamber, the air noticeably damper and cooler. Without warning, Gideon stopped. Wait here, he instructed, pressing something into her hands, a small tinderbox. If I'm not back in 10 minutes, strike a light and follow the water flow. It leads out eventually. Where are you going? Panic edged Catherine's whisper, to make sure they follow the wrong path. His voice held a deadly promise that sent a shiver through her, and to even some old scores. Before she could protest, he was gone, his footsteps fading into silence. Catherine leaned against the damp cave wall, cradling her belly with one hand. The tinderbox clutched tightly in the other. The darkness pressed against her with almost physical weight. In all her 24 years, Catherine had never known such absolute blackness, not the comforting darkness of a Virginia night with its chorus of insects and distant lamplight, but a primordial void that seemed to swallow hope itself. Yet within that void, something unexpected stirred. Not fear, though that certainly pulsed through her veins with every heartbeat. Something deeper, more elemental, a fierce determination that had lain dormant beneath layers of proper upbringing and societal expectations. Thomas had kept secrets that had ultimately killed him. Collins had sentenced her to death without hesitation. The wagon train had abandoned her without a backward glance. All her life, men had decided her fate while telling her only what they deemed necessary for her delicate constitution. No more. If she survived this, when she survived this, Catherine Hargrove would never again be the passive recipient of others' decisions. The old Catherine might indeed have died in the desert, as Running Deer suggested. This new Catherine, forged in desperation and darkness, would determine her own path forward. The baby kicked vigorously, as if in agreement. Catherine permitted herself a grim smile in the blackness. "We're still here," she whispered to her unborn child. "And we're not. Finished fighting yet? Finished fighting yet?" Time lost all meaning in the cave's absolute darkness. Catherine counted heartbeats to mark the minutes, though the racing of her pulse made it an unreliable measure. Her injured ankle throbbed in counterpoint, and the baby shifted restlessly, disturbed by her fear and the cramped position against the cave wall. 10 minutes passed, then 20 by her estimation. Gideon had not returned. Indecision paralyzed her. Should she strike the tinder as instructed and make her way alone through the unknown passages? Or wait longer, risking capture if Collins and his men doubled back? Distant sound made the decision for her, voices echoing through the stone corridors, closer than before. They had changed direction. With trembling fingers, Catherine opened the tinderbox. The small implements felt alien in her hands. Lighting, Fires had been servants' work in Richmond. But Running Deer had shown her the technique during their brief time together, and Catherine forced herself to recall each step precisely. Strike flint against steel. Direct the spark to the charcloth. Blow gently to nurture the ember. Transfer it to the tinder. The first attempts produced only frustrating sparks that died instantly. Panic threatened to overwhelm her as the voices grew marginally louder. On her sixth try, a spark caught the charcloth. Catherine bent close, her breath carefully controlled as she coaxed the glowing ember to life. Fragile light bloomed in the darkness. By its meager illumination, Catherine could make out her immediate surroundings, a cavern perhaps 20 feet across, with the promised underground stream cutting through its center. The water was clear and swift-flowing, disappearing into a low passage on the far side. Catherine transferred the ember to a small bundle of tinder from the box, creating a temporary torch that cast dancing shadows on the damp walls. No sign of Gideon, but clear evidence of his direction, deliberate scuff marks on the dusty floor leading toward the water passage. The voices were definitely closer now. She had no more time to wait. Clutching her makeshift light, Catherine limped toward the stream and the low passage beyond. The ceiling dropped sharply, forcing her to crouch, one hand braced against the slick stone wall, the other holding the precious flame high enough to see her way forward. The passage curved and twisted, sometimes widening enough that she could stand upright, other times narrowing until her swollen belly nearly brushed the walls on either side. The stream beside her feet grew stronger, fed by tributaries seeping from the stone. The air felt heavier, laden with minerals and the musty scent of bat guano. Catherine's injured ankle threatened to buckle with each step. The pain had progressed. From throbbing to shooting spasms that traveled up her calf, her makeshift torch began to sputter, the tinder nearly consumed. "Please," she whispered, unsure whether she was addressing God, the cave itself, or merely the stubborn spark in her hand. "Please, just a little longer." As if in answer, the passage ahead brightened subtly, not the orange glow of firelight, but the silvery quality of natural daylight, an exit. With renewed determination, Catherine pressed forward, extinguishing her dying torch now that she had a visible goal. The passage widened abruptly into another chamber, this one illuminated by a shaft of sunlight from a fissure in the ceiling 30 feet above. The stream pooled here before continuing through a crack barely wide enough for a child to squeeze through, much less a pregnant woman. Catherine's momentary surge of hope faltered. She had followed Gideon's instructions, tracked the water as directed, but found herself trapped nonetheless. The only exit appeared to be the light source above, impossibly high and unreachable. A scraping sound behind her sent Catherine spinning around, Running Deer's knife suddenly in her hand, though she had no memory of drawing it. Her heart leapt to her throat, then settled somewhat when a familiar figure emerged from the shadows of a side passage she hadn't noticed. "Gideon," she breathed, relief washing through her so powerfully that her knees nearly buckled. "Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you." He moved into the chamber silently, rifle in hand, his expression grim in the diffused light. A dark stain spread across his left shoulder, and his buckskin shirt was torn at the collar. "You're hurt," Catherine said, resheathing the knife and moving toward him. "Scratch," he dismissed, though the tightness around his eyes betrayed the pain he was masking. "Collins has better men with him than I anticipated." "How many?" Catherine asked, surprising herself with the practicality of her question, rather than hysterics a proper lady might have indulged in. "5 total. One won't be following anyone anymore." Gideon's voice held no remorse, only cold finality. "The others are still searching the upper passages, but they'll figure out their mistake soon enough." Catherine processed this information, With newfound clarity, one of their pursuers dead, 4 remaining, and they were still trapped with the only visible exit 30 feet overhead. "Can we climb out?" she asked, gesturing toward the light shaft. Gideon assessed the vertical walls. "Not in your condition, and my shoulder won't hold my weight, let alone yours." "Then we're trapped," Catherine concluded, a leaden feeling settling in her stomach. "Not necessarily." Gideon moved to the far side of the chamber, where shadows gathered thickest. "There's another passage here, narrower, but it bypasses the restriction where the stream exits." Catherine followed him to what appeared at first glance to be merely an indentation in the wall. Closer inspection revealed a crack just wide enough for a person to edge through sideways. "It leads to a box canyon about half a mile from here," Gideon explained. "Tall pine and swift fox should be waiting with the horses if they made it out." "If," Catherine repeated, the word hanging ominously between them. Gideon met her gaze directly. "Apache scouts are not easily killed, Catherine. Have faith in their skills, if not in mine." She nodded, recognizing the mild rebuke in his words. This man had already risked more for her than anyone in her life besides Thomas. She owed him her confidence at minimum. "You go first," he instructed, gesturing toward the crack. "I'll follow and watch our back." Catherine approached the narrow opening with trepidation. Turning sideways, she tested whether her pregnant belly would fit through the gap. It was desperately tight, but seemed passable if she angled herself precisely. "Take this," Gideon said, handing her a small revolver she hadn't realized he carried, "just in case we get separated." The weight of the weapon felt foreign in Catherine's hand, but she accepted it without protest, tucking it into her belt beside. Running deer's knife. Another line crossed, she thought fleetingly. The Virginia debutante who had fainted at the sight of her father cleaning his hunting rifles now armed herself without hesitation. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Edging into the crack, Catherine had to suppress a wave of claustrophobia as the stone pressed against both her back and her swollen abdomen. She turned her face to the side, cheeks scraping against rough rock as she inched forward into near-total darkness once more. The passage extended perhaps 15 feet, though the constriction made it feel like miles. Catherine's breath came in, shallow pants, as she fought the primal fear of being trapped, buried alive in the earth's stony embrace. The baby kicked frantically, responding to her elevated heart rate and the physical pressure of the narrow space. Finally, the passage widened enough that she could move more freely. Catherine paused, allowing her racing pulse to slow and her eyes to adjust to the dim light filtering from ahead. A series of bends in the tunnel prevented her from seeing the exit, but fresh air, carrying the scent of desert sage, confirmed they were approaching the surface. Behind her, she could hear Gideon making his way through the constriction. His progress, slower and accompanied by muffled sounds of pain as the tight passage pressed against his injured shoulder. Catherine waited until he emerged, his face several shades paler than before. "The bleeding started again," she observed, noting the fresh stains spreading down his sleeve. "It can wait," he said tersely. "We're not safe yet." They continued forward, the passage gradually widening and brightening until they could see without. Straining. Catherine's ankle protested each step, but the promise of open sky kept her moving despite the pain. The tunnel ended abruptly at a rockfall, a jumble of boulders blocking what had once been the direct exit to the canyon. Sunlight filtered through gaps between the stones, tantalizingly close. "We need to climb," Gideon said, examining the obstacle. "The rocks are stable enough. Just take it slowly and test each handhold." Catherine eyed the barrier with fresh uncertainty. Climbing would require a coordination and strength she wasn't sure she possessed in her current state. But the alternative was returning to the cave system and certain capture. "I'll go first," Gideon decided, placing his rifle in a sling across his back. "Guide you from above." Despite his injured shoulder, he scaled the rock pile with surprising agility, finding routes between larger boulders where Catherine could potentially follow. When he reached the top, he lay flat and extended his hand down toward her. "Your turn," he called softly. "There's a foothold to your right. Start there." Catherine gathered her courage and began the ascent. The first few moves were easier than expected, the rocks arranged almost like crude stairs. Halfway up, however, she encountered a gap too wide to step across, requiring her to pull herself up, using arm strength alone. She reached for a protruding stone, testing it carefully before committing her weight. The stone held, but as she pulled herself upward, a sharp pain lanced through her abdomen. Catherine gasped, momentarily frozen as her body seized in what could only be a contraction. "Catherine!" Gideon's concerned voice reached her through a fog of pain. "The baby," she managed, clinging desperately to her handhold as the contraction slowly eased. "I think it's too soon." Alarm flashed across Gideon's normally impassive features. "Can you make it the rest of the way?" Catherine drew a shaky breath, taking inventory of her body's signals. The pain had receded, leaving only a dull ache in its wake. Not labor, she decided, but a warning that her body had reached its limits. "Yes," she answered more decisively than she felt, "just slowly." With Gideon's guidance, she navigated the remaining obstacles, each movement deliberate and cautious. When she finally reached the top of the rock pile, his strong hand closed around her wrist, pulling her the final distance to safety. They emerged into a narrow box canyon, its walls rising steeply on three sides. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the rocky ground, and the air tasted of dust and distant rain. To Catherine's immense relief, Tall Pine waited with 3 horses at the canyon's open end, Swift Fox nowhere in sight. "Where's—" she began, but Gideon silenced her with a quick gesture. "Later," he murmured, helping her to her feet. "We need to ride while we still have light." Catherine didn't press the issue, reading the grim set of his mouth and the way Tall Pine's normally stoic expression had hardened into something like hatred. Swift Fox's absence told its own story, one more casualty in a conflict she had unwittingly brought to these men's doorstep. The ride from the canyon tested Catherine's endurance beyond anything she had experienced thus far. The renewed contraction had frightened her deeply, and each movement of the horse beneath her threatened to trigger another. She clenched her teeth against the pain in her ankle, her back, her overtaxed muscles, focusing solely on remaining upright. In the saddle, Gideon set a punishing pace, clearly believing speed now outweighed comfort. They rode southeast, away from their original route to Fort Bowie, following game trails and dry washes that would hide their tracks from pursuit. As sunset painted the western sky in shades of crimson and gold, they crested a low ridge overlooking a small valley, a cluster of adobe buildings nestled against the far hillside, thin spirals of cooking smoke rising into the evening air. "Mexican village," Gideon explained, drawing his horse alongside hers. "San Miguel. The headman owes me favor." "Collins won't look for us there?" Catherine asked, eyeing the settlement warily. "Eventually he might," Gideon acknowledged, "but by then we'll be gone. It's just for tonight, long enough to tend wounds and gather supplies." Catherine nodded, too exhausted to argue even if she'd wanted to. The prospect of a real roof, however humble, and perhaps even a proper bed, seemed like unimaginable luxury after the caves and desperate flight. The village dogs announced their arrival with enthusiastic barking, bringing curious faces to doorways and windows. An elderly Mexican man with a dignified bearing emerged from the largest building, his weathered face registering first surprise, then concern as he took in their bedraggled state. "Gideon," he greeted in heavily accented English, "and company most unexpected, Eduardo." Gideon replied with respectful inclination of his head. "We seek shelter, just until dawn." Eduardo's sharp gaze took in Gideon's bloodied shoulder, Catherine's obvious pregnancy, and Tall Pine's watchful stance. "The Apache does not usually come to villages," he observed. "This is serious trouble, no?" "The kind best discussed inside," Gideon confirmed. The old man nodded once. Decision made. "Come, my home is yours." Catherine allowed herself to be helped from her horse, her legs nearly buckling as they took her weight. The baby had gone ominously still within her, not the peaceful quiet of sleep, but the conservation of energy she had come to recognize as distress. "The woman needs a midwife," Gideon said quietly to Eduardo. "And privacy," Eduardo called out in rapid Spanish to a young woman hovering nearby. She hurried forward, taking Catherine's arm with gentle efficiency and leading her toward the adobe house. "Maria will care for you, Senora," Eduardo assured her. "She has brought many children into the world." As Catherine was led away, she glanced back to see Gideon watching her, his expression guarded but intent. In that moment, she realized how completely her survival had become entwined with this complex man, half white, half Apache, fully belonging nowhere yet moving confidently through all worlds. Whatever happened next, Catherine knew with bone-deep certainty that neither of them would emerge unchanged from the crucible they had entered. The desert had indeed burned away pretense, as Gideon had observed. What remained was something harder, purer, and infinitely more dangerous than the proper Virginia widow who had stepped off the wagon just 4 days ago. The question now was whether that transformation had come in time to save not only her life, but the innocent one she carried within her. Maria's capable hands guided Catherine into a small back room of Eduardo's adobe home. The space was humble but immaculately kept. Whitewashed walls adorned with a wooden crucifix and faded daguerreotypes, a narrow bed with a colorful woven blanket, and a clay pitcher of water on a rough-hewn table. A single window let in the last rays of sunset, painting the room in amber light. "Siéntese, Senora," Maria urged, helping Catherine settle onto the bed. "Rest now." The young Mexican woman's gentle touch belied the strength in her work-hardened fingers as she examined Catherine's swollen ankle, clucking disapprovingly at the purple bruising that had spread from ankle to mid-calf. "Bad, but not broken," she pronounced in careful English. "The baby?" Catherine placed both hands on her belly, relieved to feel movement again, albeit sluggish. "Moving, but something's not right. There was pain earlier, like a contraction." Maria's dark eyes sharpened with concern. She pressed experienced hands against Catherine's abdomen, feeling the shape and tension with methodical thoroughness. "Baby is low," she said finally. "Not time yet, but preparing. The running, the fear, not good for mother or child." She straightened, decision made. "You, stay in bed, I bring herbs to calm the womb." Left alone briefly, Catherine sank back against the thin pillow, her body finally registering the full extent of its exhaustion. Every muscle ached from the unaccustomed horseback riding, the desperate climb through the cave, the constant tension of flight. Her ankle throbbed with its own insistent rhythm, and a dull pressure had settled in her lower back. Yet beneath the physical discomfort lay a deeper unease. Collins's words in the cave echoed in her memory. "The woman has the map. Without it, we've got nothing to show Barton but excuses." Who was Barton? A business partner of Collins, presumably. Perhaps the financial backer of whatever scheme had cost Thomas his life. The realization that she was caught in a web larger than she'd imagined sent a fresh wave of anxiety through her. Maria returned with a steaming clay cup and a basin of water. "Drink," she instructed, holding the cup to Catherine's lips. "Helps baby stay quiet until proper time." The brew tasted of chamomile and something earthier, bitter but not unpleasant. Catherine drank obediently, then submitted to Maria's ministrations. As the woman bathed her face and hands, removing days of dust and cave grime with gentle efficiency. "You are far from home, yes?" Maria asked as she worked, her tone conversational but her eyes observant. "Virginia," Catherine replied, seeing no reason to hide the truth from this woman who was showing her such kindness. "My husband and I were traveling to California when I was separated from our wagon train." Maria's expression suggested she understood there was more to the story, but she didn't pry. "The trader, Gideon, he's good man to help you, dangerous sometimes, but honorable." "Dangerous," Catherine echoed, though she had witnessed evidence of this herself in the caves. Maria nodded, wringing out a cloth to bathe Catherine's feet. "He walks between worlds, not Apache, not white, not Mexican. Men without place must make their own law." She glanced toward the door, lowering her voice. "They say his father was killed by soldiers. His mother's people took him in, but some Apache never trusted him fully. So he became trader, guide, useful to all, belonging to none. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you." The description resonated with Catherine's observations, but added new layers to her understanding of the complex man who had saved her life. She, too, was becoming someone between worlds. No longer the sheltered Virginia Belle, nor fully the frontier. Survivor she needed to be. "Rest now," Maria urged, helping Catherine into a clean cotton nightgown borrowed from some unseen benefactor. "Tomorrow comes early, and with many decisions." Catherine wanted to ask what Maria meant, but exhaustion claimed her before she could form the words. She drifted into uneasy sleep, dreams filled with cave darkness and Collins's voice echoing from unseen passages. She woke to muffled voices from the main room, Gideon's deep rumble, Eduardo's accented replies, and a third voice, higher and agitated. Catherine struggled to sitting position, wincing as her various aches announced themselves with renewed vigor. The baby stirred within her, a reassuring movement after yesterday's frightening stillness. Moonlight streamed through the small window, suggesting she'd slept only a few hours. Catherine swung her legs carefully over the bed's edge, testing her injured ankle. It supported her weight, though painfully. Using the wall for balance, she made her way to the door and eased it open just enough to hear the conversation beyond. "Road. Into town not 2 hours ago," a young man was saying in rapid, nervous Spanish that Catherine could only partially understand with her limited knowledge of the language. 6 men asking questions about a white woman with child, offering reward for information. "Collins moves faster than I anticipated," Gideon replied grimly. "How far is their camp?" 3 miles north, by the abandoned mission. They've posted, "Au guards." Catherine leaned closer, straining to catch every word. Her movement caused a floorboard to creak betrayingly. The voices stopped abruptly. "Our guest is awake," Eduardo observed mildly. "Perhaps she should join us, since her fate is being discussed." Gideon appeared in the doorway, his imposing frame silhouetted against the lamplight behind him. His left shoulder was bandaged properly now, his bloodied shirt replaced by a clean cotton one that seemed slightly too small for his broad chest. Eduardo's, presumably. "You should be resting," he said, though without real reproach. "It's difficult to rest when men are hunting you," Catherine replied, straightening as best she could. "I heard enough to know Collins is close." Gideon studied her for a moment, then nodded once. Decision made. "Come then, we have much to discuss and little time." He offered his arm for support, which Catherine accepted gratefully as they made their way to the main room. Eduardo sat at a rough wooden table with a younger Mexican man Catherine didn't recognize. Tall Pine stood by the door, his expression even more impassive than usual. "This is Miguel," Eduardo introduced the nervous young man. "My nephew who works at the livery in Contención. He brings troubling news." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Collins and his men are looking for me in nearby towns, Catherine summarized, lowering herself carefully onto a bench. Offering rewards. Miguel nodded, eyeing her with undisguised curiosity. They describe you exactly, Senora. Blonde hair, with child, traveling with a half-breed trader. He glanced apologetically at Gideon. Their words, not mine. Did they say why they're searching? For me? Catherine asked. They claim you stole valuable property, Miguel replied. That your husband took something belonging to their employer before he died. The casual mention of Thomas's death, spoken as if it were common knowledge, struck Catherine like a physical blow. They admit he's dead then, not that he died of cholera. Miguel looked confused. They said nothing of sickness, only that there was a dispute, and your husband was killed when he tried to leave with their property. The confirmation of what she'd already suspected, that Thomas had been murdered, still hit Catherine with stunning force. She pressed a hand against her mouth, struggling to maintain composure as grief and rage warred within her. Who leads these men, Miguel? Gideon asked, his tone deliberately neutral. Is it Collins alone? The young man shook his head. A new man arrived yesterday. Older, well-dressed. They call him Barton. Catherine's head snapped up. Barton? You're certain? Si, Senora. He offers much gold for information, more than Collins did. Eduardo leaned forward, his weathered face grave in the lamplight. This Barton, he is no ordinary fortune-seeker. His clothes, his manner, a man of wealth and influence, much more dangerous than common bandits. Catherine's mind raced, piecing together this new information with what she already knew. Thomas had somehow acquired a Spanish land grant documenting silver deposits. Barton wanted it badly enough to kill for it, and now he had come personally to ensure nothing went wrong a second time. We cannot stay in San Miguel, Eduardo continued, addressing Gideon. They will search here by tomorrow. Fort Bowie is still our best option, Gideon replied, but the direct route is too exposed now. What about Tucson? Catherine suggested. It's a larger settlement. We could disappear more easily, perhaps find legal authorities who would listen to my story. Gideon shook his head. Barton's type often own the law in frontier towns. Without knowing exactly who he is or how far his influence extends, we can't risk official channels yet. Then what? Catherine demanded, frustration edging her voice. We can't keep running forever. Not with... She broke off, hands moving protectively to her belly. Gideon studied her with that penetrating blue gaze that seemed to see beyond her words to the fear beneath. There is another option, he said slowly. One I hadn't considered. Until now, all eyes turned to him expectantly. The land grant itself, he continued. It's our only leverage. Barton wants it badly enough to come personally into Apache territory, despite the risks. That suggests its value goes beyond mere silver. Deposits. What are you suggesting? Catherine asked cautiously. I know someone who can authenticate the document, perhaps tell us exactly what Barton is after, a former Spanish administrator in Tubac who still has access to colonial records. And then? Then we negotiate, Gideon said simply. From a position of knowledge rather than desperation. Negotiate with the man who murdered my husband. Catherine's voice rose incredulously. Justice comes in many forms, Catherine Hargrove, Gideon replied, his tone level but intensity burning in his eyes. Sometimes it wears the face of revenge, sometimes the face of survival. Which matters more to you right now? The blunt question silenced her. What did matter more? The impulse to see Collins and Barton punished for Thomas's death burned hot within her, yet when she felt the child move inside her womb, a different imperative asserted itself. To protect, This innocent life at all costs, even if it meant compromising her desire for vengeance. Survival, she admitted finally. For now. Gideon nodded, as if he'd known her answer before she spoke it. Then we ride for Tubac at first light. Eduardo, can you provide fresh horses? Ours are spent. Of course, the old man agreed. And provisions. Miguel will guide you through the canyon trails, routes few white men know. Tall Pine spoke for the first time, his voice surprisingly gentle in contrast to his stern appearance. I return to my people. Must tell Running Deer of Swift Fox's passing. Catherine felt a pang of guilt. In her own desperate circumstances, she'd almost forgotten the Apache scout who had died helping them escape. I'm sorry about Swift Fox, she said, meeting Tall Pine's obsidian gaze directly. He died because of me. He died as Apache warrior, Tall Pine corrected. Protecting those who cannot protect themselves, there is honor in such death. His words offered absolution she hadn't realized she needed. Catherine inclined her head in acknowledgement, a gesture of respect rather than the condescending gratitude a white lady might typically express to an Indian. Will you tell Running Deer? Catherine hesitated, uncertain how to articulate what she wanted to convey. Tell her I'm trying to become the woman she saw in me. Knew Catherine. Something like approval flickered across Tall Pine's stoic features. She already knows, he replied, or she would not have given you her knife. The conversation shifted to practical matters, the route to Tubac, provisions needed, timing of their departure. Catherine listened with half an ear, her thoughts turning inward to the revelation that had been building since Miguel delivered his news. Thomas had lied to her, not just by omission, but directly. Their journey west had never been about California, orchards and fresh starts. He'd been pursuing something valuable enough to die for, and had never trusted her enough to share that truth. The betrayal cut deeper than she'd expected. For all that their marriage had followed the proper Richmond formula, respectful rather than passionate, comfortable rather than consuming, she had believed they shared basic honesty. Now she wondered if she had ever known her husband at all. You need rest, Gideon's voice broke into her thoughts. He stood beside her, offering his arm once more. Tomorrow's journey will be difficult. Catherine allowed him to help her back. To the small bedroom, her ankle protesting every step, despite Maria's careful bandaging. At the doorway she paused. Did you know? She asked quietly. About the land grant's true significance, I mean. You recognized it immediately. Gideon met her gaze steadily. I suspected. Spanish grants with mining rights are rare and extremely valuable, but I don't know why this particular claim matters so much to Barton. That's what we need to discover. Thomas never told me, Catherine said, the hurt evident in her voice despite her attempt to hide it. Any of it. Men keep secrets for many reasons, Gideon observed, not all of them selfish. Is that wisdom from your Apache side or your white side? She asked, a hint of bitterness coloring her tone. Neither, he replied with unexpected gentleness. Just the observation of a man who has kept many secrets himself. The simple honesty of his response dissolved some of Catherine's anger. She nodded, suddenly too exhausted for further conversation. Sleep while you can, Gideon advised. I'll wake you before dawn. Alone again in the small room, Catherine eased herself onto the bed, mindful of her injuries and her precious cargo. The baby had settled into a pattern of occasional, gentle movements, reassuring after the frightening stillness during their cave escape. As she drifted towards sleep, Catherine found her thoughts returning not to Thomas and his deceptions, but to Gideon, the enigmatic half-Apache trader who had appointed himself her protector. A dangerous man, Maria had called him, yet in his danger lay her safety. Tomorrow they would ride for Tubac, seeking answers that might well lead to more questions. But tonight, In this humble adobe room far from Virginia's genteel society, Catherine Hargrove allowed herself to acknowledge a growing truth. She was changing in ways that went beyond mere survival instinct. The desert was indeed burning away pretense, as Gideon had observed days earlier. What remained was a woman Thomas would scarcely recognize, one who carried weapons, rode astride like a man, and made pragmatic choices her proper upbringing would have deemed unthinkable. Whether this transformation would prove temporary or permanent remained to be seen. But as sleep finally claimed her, Catherine's last conscious thought was that she might not want to return to her former self, even if such a path were offered. New Catherine, Running Deer had called her. Perhaps it was time to discover exactly who that woman might become. Dawn broke with the muted colors of an approaching storm. Catherine stood in Eduardo's doorway, watching thunderheads gather over the distant mountains as the household prepared for their departure. Her body ached with each movement, but a night of real rest had restored some of her strength. Maria had rebandaged her ankle and provided a sturdy walking stick, small comforts for the journey ahead. "The rain comes," Eduardo observed, joining her. "Both blessing and danger in these lands. The washes fill quickly. Flash floods take the unwary." "How far to Tubac?" Catherine asked, eyeing the threatening sky. 30 miles by direct route. Longer by the hidden trails Miguel will show you." The old man's weathered face creased with concern. "It is not good journey for woman in your condition." "Few things have been good for my condition lately," Catherine replied with a wry smile. "Yet here I am, still standing." Eduardo studied her with shrewd eyes. "See, you have what my grandmother called alma, de acero, soul of steel. It bends but does not break." The unexpected compliment warmed Catherine. A week ago, she would have modestly demurred, as befitted a proper Virginia lady. Now she simply inclined her head in acknowledgement. Gideon appeared with Miguel, both leading saddled horses. Tall Pine had already departed before sunrise, heading back to Running Deer's camp with news of their safe passage and Swift Fox's death. "We need to move," Gideon said without preamble. "Storms coming faster than expected, and Miguel spotted dust to the north. Riders." Catherine needed no further explanation. She gathered the small bundle of provisions Maria had prepared and moved toward the horses with as much haste as her injured ankle would allow. Gideon approached, his expression grave. "The journey will be hard. Your body has already endured, more than it should." "I'm aware," Catherine replied evenly. "If there were any other way—" "There isn't," she interrupted. "I can't stay here and bring danger to these people. I can't surrender to Barton and Collins, so we ride." She met his gaze directly. "I'm stronger than I look, Gideon. You of all people should know that by now." Something flickered in his blue eyes, respect perhaps, or recognition. Without further discussion, he helped her mount a sturdy pinto mare, adjusting the stirrups to accommodate her smaller frame. They set out as the first fat raindrops began to fall, Miguel leading them through a narrow arroyo behind the village. Catherine cast one last glance at the adobe homes, already blurring in the strengthening rain. Eduardo and Maria stood in the doorway, the old man's hand raised in silent farewell. The terrain grew increasingly rugged as they followed Miguel's winding route through rocky canyons and dense mesquite thickets. The rain fell steadily now, turning the dusty ground to slick mud that made the horses' footing treacherous. Catherine pulled her borrowed serape tighter, grateful for its water-resistant wool despite the growing humidity. "Storm favors us," Miguel called back over his shoulder. "Hides our tracks." "If we don't drown first," Gideon muttered, eyeing the deepening water already beginning to course through the narrow passage they traversed. Catherine sensed his concern went beyond mere discomfort. Flash floods represented a deadly threat in this landscape of stone and sand, where water found no absorption and gathered speed with terrifying rapidity. "Before we jump back in, Tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. They rode for hours through the intensifying storm, Miguel's local knowledge guiding them to higher ground whenever the water rose threateningly in the arroyos. By midday, they had covered perhaps 10 miles as the crow flies, though their circuitous route had easily doubled that distance. The baby had grown increasingly active, responding to the constant motion with persistent movement that Catherine found both reassuring and worrying. The contractions hadn't returned, but a deep ache had settled in her lower back, spreading occasionally around her sides in a band of discomfort that made each hour in the saddle a fresh exercise in endurance. They paused beneath an overhanging cliff that offered temporary shelter from the rain. Miguel dismounted to check their bearings while Gideon helped Catherine from her horse. Her legs buckled as she reached the ground, and only his quick reflexes prevented her from falling. "You need rest," he said, the concern evident in his voice as he steadied her. "What I need is to reach to back," Catherine countered, though she made no attempt to pull away from his supporting arm. "Before Barton finds us, or this baby decides to arrive early." Gideon studied her pale face, the shadows beneath her eyes betraying her exhaustion despite her determined words. Without warning, he pressed a hand gently against her belly, his expression focused, as if listening for something only he could hear. Catherine froze at the unexpected intimacy, but didn't pull away. His palm radiated warmth through the damp fabric of her dress, strangely comforting against the chill that had settled into her bones. "The child is strong," he said after a moment, "like its mother." "How would you know?" Catherine asked, genuine curiosity overriding her initial discomfort. "My mother was midwife to her people before she was cast out," Gideon explained, removing his hand. "She taught me to recognize the signs of health and distress in unborn children. Yours is active, but not frantic. A good sign." The revelation of this unexpected knowledge and the care with which he'd assessed her condition shifted something in Catherine's perception of him. This man contained multitudes beyond the taciturn trader and skilled fighter she'd witnessed thus far. "Your mother taught you well," she said softly. A shadow crossed his face. "She had no choice. A half-breed son needs every skill to survive when neither world fully claims him." Before Catherine could respond, Miguel returned, water streaming from his serape despite the brief shelter of the overhang. "Riders behind us," he reported tersely, "following our trail before the rain washed it away. 6, maybe 7 men." "Barton," Catherine whispered, instinctively touching the pouch containing Thomas's land grant. "We need to move," Gideon decided. "The canyon ahead narrows dangerously. If we don't clear it before the main flood hits—" He left the sentence unfinished, but Catherine understood the implication. Death by drowning or death by Barton's men, neither option appealed. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. They remounted hurriedly, pushing their tired horses to a faster pace despite the treacherous footing. The narrow canyon Miguel had warned about appeared ahead, a winding passage between towering rock walls that rose nearly 100 feet on either side. Already a stream of muddy water carved its path along the canyon floor, growing visibly deeper as they watched. "Water's rising fast," Miguel warned. "Flash flood coming from the mountains." "How long to get through?" Gideon asked, eyeing the dangerous passage. 20 minutes if we hurry, maybe less." "And our pursuers?" Miguel grimaced. "Half-hour behind at most. Half-hour behind at most." The decision required no discussion. They urged their horses forward into the canyon, the animals picking their way nervously through the swirling water that now reached their fetlocks. Catherine felt her mare tense beneath her, the animals' instincts warning against entering this death trap. "Steady," she murmured, stroking the horse's wet neck. "We'll make it through together." The canyon narrowed further as they progressed, the walls closing in until they rode single file through. Passages barely wide enough for horse and rider. The water deepened with alarming speed, now reaching the horses' knees, its current tugging insistently at their legs. A distant rumble echoed through the stone corridor, vibrating in Catherine's bones like approaching thunder. But this was no mere storm sound. She'd grown up near the James River, had witnessed spring floods often enough to recognize the distinctive roar of water, confined and furious. "The flood comes!" Miguel shouted from ahead, his voice nearly lost in the growing. "Then hurry!" They abandoned caution for speed, urging the frightened horses forward through water now reaching their barrels. Catherine's mare stumbled on hidden rocks, recovering barely in time to prevent disaster. The roar grew louder, drowning out all other sounds except the frantic splashing of their desperate passage. The canyon widened slightly ahead, not an exit but a small clearing where several passages converged. Miguel pointed frantically toward the leftmost route, clearly their escape path, but Catherine's attention was drawn to the opposite side where a dark line of mounted figures had appeared. Barton's men. They'd found another way into the canyon, and now blocked the exit route. Gideon saw them simultaneously, his rifle appearing in his hands with fluid speed. "Miguel! Alternative exit?" The young Mexican gestured upward to a narrow ledge some 20 feet above. "Climbing path leads to—" "Mesa!" The flood's roar intensified, and Catherine turned to see a wall of churning brown water surging around the bend behind them, carrying uprooted trees and debris in its furious advance. Their pursuers had seen it too, their disciplined line disintegrating, into panic as they wheeled their mounts toward higher ground. "Off the horses!" Gideon commanded, already dismounting and pulling Catherine's mare toward him. "They'll never make the climb." Catherine slid from her saddle into water now reaching her waist, its cold force threatening to sweep her feet from under her. Gideon's strong arms circled her waist, anchoring her against the current as he guided her toward the rock face where Miguel was already scrambling upward. "The horses!" she protested, watching the terrified animals fighting the rising water. "No time," Gideon said grimly, slapping his mount's rump to send it toward open ground. "Climb now or die here." The stark choice galvanized Catherine. Ignoring her injured ankle's screaming protest, she began the ascent, finding handholds in the rough stone as Miguel helped from above and Gideon supported from below. The roar of the approaching flood wall had become deafening, and spray already drenched them as the leading edge of the surge reached their position. With a final desperate effort, Catherine pulled herself onto the narrow ledge just as the main force of the flood struck below. Gideon hauled himself up beside her seconds later, his expression grim as they both turned to watch the devastating power unleashed beneath them. The horses had no chance. Catherine caught a glimpse of thrashing heads and flailing legs before the animals disappeared beneath the churning torrent. Barton's men fared no better. Some had attempted to reach higher ground, others to outrun the flood. The water claimed them all with implacable fury. "Dios mío," Miguel whispered, crossing himself as human and animal alike vanished in the maelstrom. Catherine felt no satisfaction in their enemy's destruction, only a hollow awareness of how easily they might have shared the same fate. She turned away from the devastating scene, focusing instead on their precarious perch, a natural ledge perhaps 3 feet wide that curved upward along the canyon wall toward the mesa above. "Can we reach the top?" she asked, forcing practicality through the shock of what they'd witnessed. "See," Miguel confirmed, "but it is difficult climb, even without—" He gestured vaguely toward her pregnant belly, embarrassment coloring his features. "Even without me being ready to burst like overripe fruit?" Catherine supplied dryly. "I'll manage. I've come too far to falter now." The climb proved even more challenging than Miguel had implied. The ledge narrowed in places to mere inches, requiring them to press flat against the rock face and edge sideways, fingers desperately seeking purchase in tiny crevices. Catherine's arms trembled with exertion, her injured ankle threatening to buckle with each careful step. Gideon remained close behind her, his presence both reassurance and safety net. "Almost there," he encouraged as they neared the final scramble, "to the mesa's edge. Just a little further." As if the words had tempted fate, the stone beneath Catherine's right foot suddenly crumbled. She lurched sideways, a cry escaping her lips as her weight shifted precariously over the 100-foot drop. Gideon's hand shot out with serpent-like speed, catching her arm and pulling her back against the rock face. "I've got you," he said, his voice steady despite the near disaster. "Breathe, Catherine, just breathe." She obeyed, forcing air into lungs constricted by terror, willing her racing heart to slow. When she'd regained some composure, they continued, more cautiously, testing each foothold before committing weight. The final push onto the mesa required Gideon to lift Catherine bodily over the edge, her strength nearly spent. She collapsed onto solid ground, gasping with relief and exhaustion as the men pulled themselves up beside her. The storm had passed. During their desperate climb, leaving a strange, luminous quality to the late afternoon light. The mesa stretched before them, a flat expanse of rock and sparse vegetation that offered no shelter but blessed safety from the flood still raging in the canyon below. "We lost the horses," Miguel said unnecessarily, his voice hollow with shock. "And the supplies. We're alive," Gideon countered. "That's more than can be said for Barton's men." A sudden spasm gripped Catherine's abdomen, different from the earlier contractions. Sharper, more insistent, she gasped, curling forward as the pain radiated outward from her core. Gideon was beside her instantly, concern etched in his features. "Catherine, something's wrong," she managed between clenched teeth. "The baby—" The pain receded slightly, allowing her to straighten. A warm wetness trickled down her inner thighs, and understanding dawned with cold clarity. "My waters have broken," she said quietly. "The baby is coming." Miguel paled visibly, but Gideon's expression remained calm as he assessed their situation with practiced efficiency. "How far to Tubac from here?" he asked Miguel. 10 miles, maybe 12, the young man replied. "On foot, with her condition." He shook his head doubtfully. "We won't make it," Catherine stated what they all knew. "This child won't wait for improper surroundings." Gideon studied her face, clearly weighing options that ranged from desperate to impossible. "Can you walk at all? There's a hunter's cabin a few miles east. Basic shelter, but better than open ground." Catherine pushed herself upright, testing her shaking legs. "I can walk," she said with more confidence than she felt. "For now, at least." They set off across the mesa, Miguel scouting ahead for the easiest path, while Gideon supported Catherine with a strong arm around her waist. The contractions returned at irregular intervals, each one forcing her to stop and breathe through the pain. "Tell me about the land grant," she said during one such pause, desperate for distraction. "Why would it be worth killing for?" Gideon seemed to recognize her need to focus on something beyond her body's demands. "Spanish land grants with mineral rights are complicated legal entities," he explained. "Most transferred to American ownership after the Gadsden purchase, but some remained in dispute. If your husband's document is what I suspect, it's not just about silver deposits." "What then?" "Control of water rights," Gideon said simply. "In desert territories, water is more valuable than silver. The coordinates on your map mark not just mining sites but springs, reliable water sources that could determine the future development of the entire region." Catherine absorbed this information as another contraction gripped her. The bigger picture was finally becoming clear. Thomas hadn't been chasing mere mineral wealth, but something far more fundamental and powerful: the ability to control who could settle and survive in this harsh territory. Barton represents railroad interests. Gideon continued when she could focus again. They're pushing to establish the southern route through Arizona. Whoever controls the water sources controls where tracks can be laid, where towns will develop. How do you know this? Catherine asked, genuine curiosity momentarily overriding her discomfort. A shadow crossed Gideon's face. Because the same interests forced many Apache from their ancestral water sources, my mother's people among them. The personal connection explained much about his willingness to help her, not mere chivalry, but a deeper understanding of what powerful men were willing to do in pursuit of territorial control. "Look there," Miguel called from ahead, pointing toward a cluster of scrub oaks that marked a subtle depression in the mesa's surface. "The cabin!" The structure barely deserved the name, a crude shelter of stacked stone with a partially collapsed wooden roof. But to Catherine's eyes, it appeared as welcoming as Richmond's finest hotel. Another contraction seized her just as they reached the doorway, this one strong enough to drive her to her knees. "The baby is coming faster than I expected," she gasped. When the pain subsided enough to speak, first births usually take longer, Gideon helped her inside, where Miguel was already clearing debris from the dirt floor. A crude hearth dominated one wall, long cold, but still functional. "Miguel, gather firewood," Gideon instructed, "and see if you can find prickly pear. The fruit helps with childbirth pain." The young man nodded and hurried out, seemingly relieved, to have a task that took him away from the imminent birth. Left alone with Catherine, Gideon helped her to a relatively clean corner where she could brace her back against the stone wall. His movements were methodical as he shrugged out of his buckskin jacket and laid it beneath her, then used his knife to cut strips from his spare shirt for birthing cloths. "You seem remarkably prepared for this situation," Catherine observed, between increasingly frequent contractions. "I told you my mother was a midwife," he replied, arranging the cloth strips beside her. "I assisted with deliveries when no other women were available. A man of many talents," she managed, before another wave of pain claimed her attention. When it passed, Gideon knelt beside her, his expression more serious than she'd yet seen. "Catherine, this won't be an easy birth. We have minimal supplies, you're exhausted, and the baby is coming fast. I need to examine you to understand how far along things are." The proper Virginia lady in her wanted to refuse such intimacy from a man not her husband. The pragmatic survivor recognized necessity. Catherine simply nodded, adjusting her position to allow him access. His examination was clinical and swift, his hands far gentler than his weather-beaten appearance would suggest. "The baby has already descended," he reported. "Not long now." Miguel returned with an armful of wood and several prickly pear fruits, their magenta flesh already peeled. Gideon quickly built a small fire, then prepared a space beside Catherine where the infant could be placed after delivery. "I need you to find water," he instructed Miguel. "There should be a seep spring behind the cabin. We'll need it clean for the mother and child." As Miguel departed again, Catherine seized Gideon's wrist with surprising strength. "If a choice must be made," she said intently, "save the child. Promise me." Gideon's blue eyes held hers steadily. "That choice won't be necessary, Catherine. Hargrove, you're both going to live." The certainty in his voice gave her courage as the labor intensified, contractions coming so rapidly now that she barely had time to breathe between them. Catherine lost track of time, her world narrowing to the rhythm of pain and effort, Gideon's calm instructions, and the overwhelming imperative to bring her child safely into the world. When the final moment came, it happened with startling swiftness. One moment she was fighting through what felt like an impossible task. The next, Gideon was placing a squalling, red-faced infant on her chest. "A daughter," he said, his voice gentler than she'd ever heard it. "Healthy and strong." Catherine gazed, down at the tiny, perfect face, emotions too complex for words flooding through her. This child, Thomas's legacy, her future, their shared creation, had survived against impossible odds. They both had. "Hello, little one," she whispered, tears streaming unchecked down her face. "You've had quite a journey already." As Gideon helped clean both mother and child with the water Miguel had brought, Catherine felt a profound sense of transformation. Running Deer had been right. Old Catherine had died in the desert days ago. This new Catherine, mother, survivor, owner of her own destiny, had emerged from the crucible of loss and danger, fundamentally changed. "What will you name her?" Gideon asked as he wrapped the infant in a clean portion of his shirt. Catherine studied her daughter's face, already showing signs of both Thomas's determined chin and her own high cheekbones. This child would need strength to face the world that had nearly claimed them both before her birth. Hope, she decided, because that's what carried us through. She looked up at Gideon, meeting his gaze directly. "And Grace, after your mother." Running Deer's Apache name. Surprise flickered across his face, followed by something deeper, a recognition that transcended the barriers between their worlds. "Hope Grace Hargrove," he repeated softly, "a name for new beginnings." Outside, the sun was setting over the Arizona territory, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. The floodwaters below would eventually recede, revealing a landscape, scoured and changed. Tubac still waited ahead, with its promise of answers about the document that had cost Thomas his life. But in this moment, cradling her newborn daughter in a crude stone shelter miles from civilization, Catherine Hargrove understood that some journeys matter far more than their destinations. She had been left to die in the desert, abandoned by those who should have protected her. Instead, she had found strength she never knew she possessed, and allies in the most unexpected places. "What happens now?" Miguel asked from the doorway, his young face solemn in the fading light. Catherine looked down at her daughter, then up at Gideon, whose presence had become as essential to her as water in this parched land. "Now," she said with newfound certainty, "we forge our own path forward, forge our own path forward, forge our